They scoffed at her worth, until a quiet cowboy laid down silver and ended their laughter. The town woke early that morning, the way it always did on auction days. Dust rose from the dirt road as wagons and old trucks rolled in from every direction. People came not just to buy and sell, but to watch, to judge, and to feel important for a few hours. By mid-morning, the square was crowded with loud voices, rough laughter, and the sharp sound of bargaining. Near the edge of the square, a young woman stood beside a small wooden table. The table was not new. One leg had been fixed with a piece of rope, and the surface showed years of wear. On top of it, she had placed her handmade items carefully, lining them up as neatly as she could. Each piece had taken time, patience, and skill. She had worked late nights to finish them, often by dim light, telling herself they were worth something. She believed that even if others did not. Her clothes were clean but simple. They showed signs of hard work and careful mending. Her hair was tied back, not for beauty but for practicality. She kept her shoulders straight, even though her stomach felt tight with worry. This was not her first time here, and she already knew how people could be. At first, a few buyers slowed down to look. They leaned in, touched the items, and nodded without interest. One man smirked and shook his head. Another laughed softly and said the price was too high. Soon, their reactions became louder and more careless. A group of traders gathered nearby, whispering and pointing. One of them made a joke about how anyone could make such things. Another said she should be grateful if someone paid half of what she asked. Each word felt like a small cut. She kept her eyes on the table, pretending not to hear, pretending it did not matter. Inside, she was fighting the urge to pack up and leave. But leaving would mean going home empty-handed again. It would mean another night of worry and another morning of starting over with less than before. She remembered why she came. She remembered the promises she had made to herself. That memory helped her stay where she was. The laughter grew bolder. One man said she was dreaming if she thought her work belonged in a place like this. Another said she should find something easier to sell, something people would actually want. Their voices carried, and others nearby joined in, smiling as if it were harmless fun. She finally lifted her head and spoke, her voice quiet but steady. She said the price was fair. She said the work took time and care. Her words were not angry, only honest. That seemed to make them laugh even more. While all this happened, a cowboy stood a short distance away. He had arrived earlier and tied his horse near the fence. He did not move much and did not speak at all. His hat sat low on his head, shading his eyes. His clothes were worn but clean, chosen for comfort rather than attention. People passed by him without a second glance. He had been watching the auction slowly, not in a hurry to buy anything. When the laughter reached him, he turned his head. He saw the woman standing alone behind her table, surrounded by noise that did not belong to her. He noticed the way she held herself, stiff but proud. He noticed the careful way her items were placed, as if each one mattered. The cowboy stepped closer, still unnoticed. He did not interrupt. He listened. The woman felt the pressure building. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted one of the items on the table. She told herself she could endure this. She always had. But the looks on their faces made it harder. They were not just refusing to buy. They were deciding her value for her. One trader leaned forward and said something sharp about lowering her price. Another suggested she should be thankful for attention at all. Their words landed heavy, even though they spoke them lightly. The cowboy's eyes moved from the men to the table. He examined the work carefully. He could see the small details others ignored. He could tell the difference between rushed work and careful effort. He did not rush his judgment. The woman took a slow breath. She felt her throat tighten, but she would not cry here. She had learned long ago that tears only fed the cruelty of people like this. She straightened her back and prepared to say she was done for the day. Before she could speak, the cowboy stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a speech. He reached into his coat calmly and pulled out a small cloth. He unfolded it and placed several pieces of silver on the table. The sound was clear and sharp, cutting through the laughter like a blade through fabric. The crowd fell silent. The cowboy looked at the woman and spoke simply. He said the work was worth the price. He said he would take it. For a moment no one moved. The traders who had been laughing stared at the silver, then at the man, unsure what to say. The woman looked down at the table, then back at him, her eyes wide. She had not expected this, not from anyone. Her heart raced. She tried to speak but could not find the words. She nodded slowly, afraid that if she spoke too quickly, the moment might disappear. The cowboy pushed the silver toward her. He did not wait for approval from the crowd. He did not look around to see who was watching. His focus stayed on the table and the woman behind it. The silence felt heavy now, not with mockery but with something else. The men who had laughed shifted their weight and looked away. One cleared his throat as if to speak, but thought better of it. The woman gathered the items with careful hands and placed them into a simple cloth. She handed them to the cowboy, still unsure if this was real. Her fingers brushed the silver briefly and she felt its weight. It was more than money. It was proof. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly and stepped back. He did not smile. He did not wait for thanks. He turned and walked away, blending back into the movement of the square. The woman stood still for a long moment, holding the silver. The noise slowly returned, but it was different now. People spoke more quietly. Some glanced at her table with new interest. Others avoided looking at her at all. She took a deep breath. Her chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. The laughter that had hurt her was gone, replaced by something far more powerful. Respect, even if it came late, had finally found her. And somewhere near the fence, the cowboy mounted his horse, already moving on, leaving behind a moment that would change far more than one day at the auction. The square did not return to normal right away after the cowboy walked away. The noise came back slowly, like a fire being rebuilt after rain. People spoke again, but their voices were lower. The laughter that once rolled freely now sounded forced and unsure. The woman stood behind her table, still holding the silver, feeling its weight in her palm as if it might vanish if she let go. She carefully wrapped the silver in a small cloth and placed it beneath the table. Her hands moved with purpose, but inside she was shaken. What had just happened felt unreal. For so long she had stood in places like this, hearing the same words, seeing the same looks. Today was the first time someone had stopped it without shouting, without anger, simply by believing her work had value. A few people returned to her table, pretending they had always been interested. One man picked up an item and examined it again, this time more closely. Another asked the price in a polite tone, as if he had not laughed earlier. She answered calmly, keeping her voice steady. She did not lower her price. She did not apologize. Some buyers paid, others walked away, but something had shifted. She could feel it in the way people looked at her now. They were no longer deciding whether she belonged there. They were deciding whether they could afford what she offered. By late afternoon, the sun dipped lower and the crowd thinned. The woman packed what remained of her items, feeling tired but lighter than before. She had sold enough to make the trip worthwhile. More than that, she carried something she had not felt in a long time, confidence that did not depend on hope alone. As she loaded her things into her cart, she noticed the cowboy again, standing near the water trough. He was speaking quietly with an older man, his posture relaxed. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to thank him properly. Another part feared embarrassing herself or him. She had learned that people who did kind things often did not want attention. Still, she walked toward him. When she reached him, the older man had already stepped away. The cowboy turned slightly, sensing her presence. Up close, she noticed the lines on his face, shaped by sun and years of quiet work. His eyes were calm, not curious or proud. She thanked him. Her voice shook just a little. He nodded and said it was nothing. He said good work should be paid fairly. His words were simple, spoken without drama. He did not stay to talk. He wished her well and turned back to his horse. She watched him leave again, this time more slowly. She wondered where he came from, what life had shaped him into someone who noticed what others ignored. But she did not chase answers. Some moments were meant to stay just as they were. The road home was long and quiet. The cart creaked beneath her and the sky shifted from gold to deep blue. As she walked, her thoughts replayed the day again and again. The laughter, the silver, the sudden silence. Each memory felt sharp and clear. When she reached her small home, she lit a lamp and sat at the table. She unwrapped the silver and counted it carefully. It was more than she had earned in weeks. She set some aside for supplies and some for the bills that waited. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel fear when thinking about tomorrow. The next days brought change, slow but steady. Word traveled fast in a town like this. People talked about the quiet cowboy and the woman at the table. Some told the story with respect. Others softened their own actions when repeating it. But the message stayed the same. Her work had value and someone had proved it. More buyers came to her home to place orders. They knocked with careful hands and polite voices. She welcomed them, cautious but hopeful. Each piece she made felt stronger, shaped not just by skill but by belief in herself. Yet doubt did not vanish completely. Late at night, when the house was silent, old fears returned. She wondered if this respect would fade. She wondered if people would laugh again once the story grew old. She reminded herself that even if they did, she had already faced it once and survived. One evening, weeks later, she saw the cowboy again. He stood outside the general store, leaning against the post, waiting patiently. This time, people greeted him with nods and quiet respect. She noticed how little he reacted to it. Their eyes met across the street. He tipped his hat slightly, the same way he had before. She smiled, a small smile but real. They did not speak that day. They did not need to. Something had already been said in silver and silence. As the seasons changed, her life continued to shift. She saved more. She worked with steady hands and a steady heart. The memory of that auction stayed with her, not as a moment of pain, but as a turning point. She learned that worth did not come from loud voices or approval. Sometimes it came from one quiet action that changed how the world looked at you and how you looked at yourself. And far from the noise of the town, the cowboy continued his own path, unaware of how deeply his simple choice had shaped another life. Life did not suddenly become easy after the auction, but it became clearer. The woman woke each morning with the same work waiting for her, yet something inside her had shifted. Her hands still worked long hours, her back still ached by evening, but her thoughts were no longer filled with doubt alone. There was now a steady voice inside her that reminded her she had worth, even on days when no one came to buy. Orders continued to arrive, slowly at first. Some people were honest and kind. Others came only because the story had made her work seem important. She learned to tell the difference. She stayed polite but firm, refusing to rush or lower her standards. Every item she made carried the same care as before, but now she worked with confidence instead of fear. Still, not everyone accepted the change. A few of the traders who had laughed at her before did not like losing their place above her. They spoke quietly among themselves, suggesting her success was luck, or that it would not last. They smiled when they passed her, but their eyes were cold. She noticed, but she did not respond. She had learned that not every voice deserved an answer. One afternoon, she returned to the town square to sell again. This time, she chose a better spot, closer to the center. Setting up her table, she felt eyes on her. Some faces showed respect, others showed surprise. She stood tall, reminding herself she had earned this place. The market grew busy. Buyers stopped, asked questions, and paid fair prices. For a moment, everything felt balanced. Then she heard a familiar laugh behind her. One of the traders stepped forward, speaking loudly enough for others to hear. He questioned her prices again, though his tone was calmer than before. Another joined him, suggesting she was charging more than her work deserved. Their words were careful, but their intent was clear. They wanted to test her. Her heart beat faster. The old feeling tried to return. She took a slow breath and answered calmly. She explained her process, the time, the materials. She did not raise her voice. She did not apologize. A small crowd gathered. Some listened closely. Others waited to see what would happen. The traders pushed again, hinting she should be grateful for attention. The air grew tense. Before she could respond again, a familiar presence entered the space. The cowboy walked into view, his steps slow and steady. He stopped near her table, his eyes taking in the scene without judgment. The traders noticed him and grew quiet. They remembered the silver. They remembered the silence that followed. One of them muttered something and stepped back. The cowboy did not speak at first. He picked up one of the items and examined it carefully, the same way he had before. He nodded slightly, then set it down. Only then did he look at the traders. He said the price was fair. He said quality did not change just because people wanted it cheap. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. The traders looked away, unwilling to argue further. The crowd slowly dispersed, disappointed perhaps that there would be no scene. The woman felt a wave of relief, mixed with something else. Gratitude, yes, but also strength. She realized she had almost stood alone this time. The cowboy had supported her, but she had spoken for herself first. After the market slowed, she thanked him again. This time she did not feel small when she spoke. He smiled slightly and said she was doing fine on her own. He told her not to let others decide her limits. They walked a short distance together before parting. Their conversation was simple, about weather and work. Yet it felt important. She learned he lived outside town, working land that did not draw much attention. He did not speak of himself often. Days turned into weeks. The woman grew busier than ever. She hired help for small tasks, something she had never imagined before. With more orders came more responsibility. She felt pressure, but it was the kind that pushed her forward instead of holding her down. One evening, she sat alone, counting her earnings. The numbers mattered, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere. She realized her greatest change was not her income, but her voice. She no longer waited for permission to exist in spaces that once felt closed to her. She thought of the cowboy, of how his quiet action had started something bigger than either of them knew. She wondered if he understood that. Trouble came again when she least expected it. A supplier tried to overcharge her, assuming she would agree without question. When she refused, he threatened to stop selling to her. The old fear rose, but it did not control her. She thanked him and walked away, finding another source days later. That night she slept well. The next time she saw the cowboy, it was outside the town, near the road that led to the hills. He was fixing a fence, working alone. She stopped and offered him water. They spoke for a while, sharing quiet moments between words. She told him about the challenges, about standing her ground. He listened, nodding now and then. He said struggles did not disappear when life improved. They only changed shape. As she walked away, she felt something settle inside her. She was no longer waiting to be rescued. She was building something lasting. And in that understanding, she stepped into a future shaped by her own choices, strengthened by one moment of belief, and guided by a quiet courage she had always carried within herself. The changes in her life began to feel real in ways she could no longer ignore. Her days were fuller than ever, starting before sunrise and ending long after dark. Work followed her everywhere, but it was no longer work filled with fear. It was work built on choice. She chose what to make, how much to charge, and who to work with. Each choice strengthened her, even when it tired her. Not everyone welcomed her growth. Some people smiled and praised her to her face, then spoke differently when they thought she was not listening. She heard the whispers anyway. They said she had changed. They said she thought too highly of herself now. She understood what they meant. They missed the version of her who stayed quiet and easy to dismiss. At first, those words stung. Old habits do not vanish quickly. But she reminded herself that growing often made others uncomfortable. She did not let it slow her steps. One morning, a large order arrived from a buyer outside town. It was the biggest request she had ever received. The payment would help her for months, but the work would be heavy. She spent hours thinking it through. Accepting it meant risk. Refusing it meant safety. She chose to accept. The days that followed were hard. Her hands ached and her mind stayed busy even while she slept. Small mistakes cost time. Delays tested her patience. More than once she wondered if she had reached too far. When doubt crept in, she remembered the sound of silver on wood. Not the money, but what it stood for. Someone had seen her effort when others laughed. That memory steadied her. As the deadline drew closer, trouble came again from an unexpected place. A group of traders complained that she was taking too much attention, that her success made it harder for others to sell. They spoke to town leaders, pushing for rules that would limit where and how she could sell. She heard about it late one evening. Fear returned, sharp and familiar. For a moment, she felt small again. The thought of losing what she had built made her chest tighten. The next day she went to the meeting herself. The room was full. Voices rose and fell as people spoke over one another. When her turn came, the room quieted, not out of kindness but curiosity. She stood there, her hands steady at her sides. She spoke clearly. She explained her work, her prices, and her respect for others' space. She said she had followed every rule and asked only to be treated fairly. She did not accuse. She did not beg. Some people nodded. Others avoided her eyes. The decision took time, but when it came, it was in her favor. The rules stayed the same. She stepped outside afterward, her legs shaking slightly. Winning did not feel loud or proud. It felt calm. It felt earned. That evening she walked along the road, letting the cool air settle her thoughts. She saw the cowboy ahead, leaning against a fence, watching the sky fade into night. He noticed her and waited. She told him what had happened. He listened, as he always did, without interrupting. When she finished, he said she had done well, not because she had won, but because she had shown up. They stood in silence for a while. She realized how much that silence meant to her now. It was a place where she did not need to prove anything. As weeks passed, her large order was completed and delivered. The payment arrived safely. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to rest. She fixed parts of her home she had long ignored. She bought better tools. She even allowed herself small comforts she once considered wasteful. With stability came reflection. She thought about the woman she had been at the auction, standing alone behind a fragile table. That version of herself still existed, but she was no longer alone. The town continued to change around her. Some people grew kinder, others stayed distant. She accepted both. Respect did not require everyone's approval. One day, a young girl came to her door, holding a small, uneven piece she had made herself. She asked for advice, her eyes hopeful and unsure. The woman smiled and invited her inside. They worked together for an hour. The girl listened closely, grateful for guidance that was never offered to the woman when she was younger. When the girl left, the woman felt a quiet pride that surprised her. She understood then that her journey was no longer just about survival. It was about example. Late that night, she sat by the window, watching the moon rise. She thought about how laughter once tried to define her, how easily voices could wound, and how quietly one act of fairness had changed the direction of her life. She did not know what challenges still waited ahead. She only knew she would face them standing, with her voice steady and her worth already decided. And somewhere beyond the edge of town, the cowboy continued his work, never seeking credit, unaware that his quiet choice had become part of a much larger story, one that was still being written, step by steady step. The town felt different now, though the buildings and roads had not changed. The change lived in how people moved, how they spoke, and how they looked at one another. The woman noticed it each time she walked through the square. Where there had once been careless laughter, there was now quiet attention. Where people once passed her table without a glance, they now slowed down, curious and respectful. She did not let it turn her proud in a way that hardened her. She stayed kind, but she stayed firm too. She had learned that kindness and strength could exist together. They did not cancel each other out. Her work continued to grow. Orders came from farther places, carried by word of mouth rather than noise. She planned her days carefully, leaving space to rest, something she once believed was a luxury meant for other people. Rest made her work better. It made her thinking clearer. One morning she returned to the auction square not to sell but to watch. She stood near the edge, seeing the scene from a new distance. A young man stood behind a small table, his shoulders tense, his eyes unsure. He reminded her of herself from not so long ago. A few voices nearby laughed at his prices. The sound was familiar. She stepped forward before she even realized she had decided. She asked to see his work. She listened as he explained, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. She paid what he asked. Not more, not less, just fair. The laughter faded. The young man looked at her in surprise, then relief. She smiled and wished him well, then stepped back into the crowd. The moment felt complete, like a circle closing gently. Later that day, she walked the long road home as the sun lowered. The sky stretched wide above her, calm and open. She thought about how the world had not changed overnight. It had shifted slowly, one choice at a time. Near the fence at the edge of town, she saw the cowboy again. He was there as he often was, quiet and steady, fixing what needed fixing. This time she stopped beside him without hesitation. They spoke about simple things: weather, work, the way time seemed to move faster when life was full. Their words were few, but the space between them felt easy. She thanked him once more, not with urgency but with peace. He nodded, saying that she had done the hard part herself. He said all he had done was notice. She realized then that noticing was not a small thing. It was the beginning of respect. As months passed, the woman became someone others sought out, not just for her work but for her calm advice. She never forgot how it felt to be overlooked. That memory guided her choices. She spoke up when she saw unfairness. She stayed quiet when listening mattered more. The town slowly learned from her example, though few would admit it. Markets became less cruel. Prices were argued with less mockery. People still disagreed, but they learned to do it with care. One evening she sat at her table, the same one she had once feared would collapse under her hands. She repaired it carefully, replacing the rope with a strong, steady support. The table looked different now, sturdier, but it still carried the marks of where it had been. She smiled at that. She understood now that worth did not arrive suddenly, carried by applause or praise. It grew slowly, like roots beneath the ground, unseen until they were strong enough to hold weight. The laughter that once tried to define her no longer echoed in her mind. In its place was quiet confidence, earned and kept. On a clear morning she saw the cowboy ride past her home. He did not stop, only tipped his hat as he went. She returned the gesture, watching him disappear down the road. She did not know where his path led. She only knew that their lives had crossed at the right moment. As the day unfolded, she returned to her work, steady and focused. The world outside moved as it always had, full of noise and judgment and chance. But inside her, something remained settled. She had found her voice. She had claimed her place. And no laughter, no doubt, no careless word could take that away again.